I still remember the exact sound of glass striking glass that night. 100 crystal flutes clinked together, the air filled with laughter and perfume, the waiters carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres through the gilded ballroom. It was supposed to be a rehearsal dinner, a gentle preview of the happiest day of my life. Instead, it was the moment I understood exactly what humiliation feels like. He, my fiancé, stood tall at the center of the long table, his tie-loosened cheeks already glowing from too much wine. And with that smug grin I had seen too often in private but never in public, he raised his glass and shouted for everyone to hear. "Half of your $1 million inheritance is mine. Just sign the prenup and relax." The room roared with laughter. Even his cousins slammed their palms on the table as if it were the funniest joke they had ever heard. But it was not a joke to me. In front of me lay a folder, the leather stiff and shining under the chandelier. Inside was the prenup pages, marked with sticky notes, a bold notary stamp pressed into the first sheet. Someone had slid it across the table toward me as though I were a careless secretary who had forgotten to finish her paperwork. I pressed my hand against it not to sign, but to keep myself from trembling. Humiliation, they say, comes in waves. The first wave hit like cold water. My face burned while my body chilled, my ears filled with the sound of clinking glasses and mocking whispers. The second wave was quieter, heavier. It was the weight of realizing no one at that table, not his mother, not his best man, not even the bridesmaids, looked at me with sympathy. They were entertained. I was the entertainment. I swallowed the dryness in my throat and forced a smile. "Pretend calm," I told myself. "Do not let them see you drown." The table burst into another round of laughter as someone snapped a picture. I noticed a phone raised higher than the rest, its lens glinting red under the light. They were not just laughing, they were recording. That video would spread faster than spilled wine. I knew it before dessert even arrived. And yet I sat there with my hand on that folder, my lips curled into a performance of serenity. Inside, the anger grew like fire trapped in a glass jar. People think betrayal is sharp like a knife. For me, it was blunt. It pressed down on my chest with the weight of a stone. I had trusted this man enough to build a life with him, to plan a wedding with him, to believe his words of partnership and respect. And here he was, turning my inheritance, my late aunt's estate, a property she had worked her entire life for, into the punchline of a dinner toast. The waiters kept moving, refilling glasses, bringing out trays of roasted duck and asparagus, all while my own appetite disappeared completely. Around me, the laughter mellowed into background chatter, but no one turned to me with apology. No one asked if I was all right. To them, I was invisible, a woman meant to sign papers, wear a dress, and smile for photos. But what they didn't know was this. I never forget humiliation. I never let it rot quietly in my chest. I file it away like a deed in a safe, and I wait. That night, I drove home alone. He stayed behind with his friends, claiming he needed to celebrate the rehearsal. I parked in front of my apartment, turned off the engine, and sat in silence. The city lights reflected off the windshield red and white streaks from passing cars. Inside my handbag, that cursed folder weighted heavy as a stone. I could hear his voice echoing in my head. "Half of your $1 million inheritance is mine." I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned pale, and I promised myself this would not end with me in tears begging for dignity. This would end differently. But that part I'll tell you in a moment. Tell me, where are you watching from tonight? And hit subscribe because we need to talk about families, money, and betrayal. I woke the next morning with the weight of that folder still beside my bed. It was not just paper. It was a declaration, a reminder that my worth to him was measured in deeds and dollar amounts. The sun filtered through the blinds, painting stripes of light across the carpet, but it brought me no warmth. I poured myself coffee black and bitter, and stared out at the street below. Families hurried children into cars. Neighbors waved at each other on their way to work. Ordinary life moved forward while mine had suddenly tilted like a table with one broken leg. Let me tell you who I am so you understand why that toast cut so deep. My name is Evelyn. I am 32 years old, a lecturer at the university. I have spent my life working for stability, saving carefully, never gambling with money or love. 3 years ago, my aunt passed away and left me her estate, a grand property valued at nearly $2 million. I had not expected it. She had no children of her own, and she loved me as if I were her daughter. That estate was not just land and walls. It was trust, heritage, responsibility. And now it was treated like party banter. My fiancé's family had celebrated the inheritance more than I had. I should have noticed then. His mother, A woman with diamonds, the size of grapes on her fingers, had leaned across the table weeks earlier and said, "Now you'll finally be worthy of our son. Worthy." As if my degrees and career meant nothing until a house and a bank account entered the picture. I had brushed it off at the time. People say strange things when money is mentioned, but in hindsight, it was the first crack in the mirror. Later that week, I received a message in the family group chat. His sister had written, "Don't forget to bring the deed on Saturday. Dad wants proof it's real." The deed. Proof. These were not the words of family welcoming me. These were the words of investors, creditors, people hungry to confirm collateral. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed my thumb, hovering but unwilling to reply. That evening when he came over, I asked him plainly, "Why does your family need proof? Why do they speak as if my inheritance belongs to them?" He laughed, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "You're overthinking. They just want to be reassured. Besides, once we're married, what's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine." But I knew better. His eyes didn't sparkle with romance when he said it. They gleamed with calculation. I carried my suspicions silently. At dinners, his uncles asked how much land came with the estate. At brunch, his cousins whispered about turning it into a luxury retreat. Every time I mentioned teaching, their eyes glazed over. But the moment inheritance was brought up, they leaned forward, eager as vultures circling a carcass. Betrayal does not always roar. Sometimes it hums beneath polite conversation, gathering strength, until one day it bursts through the surface. I could feel it building like pressure behind a dam. And yet I smiled through it. I wore dresses, I toasted champagne. I pretended not to notice. To fight too early would only mark me as paranoid, insecure, unstable. I chose patience. But here is the truth I held close. Patience is not the same as forgiveness. Patience is strategy. One night after another exhausting dinner where his father asked about property taxes, as though it were already his burden, I walked into my study and opened the drawer where I kept my aunt's letters. She had written to me often, her handwriting elegant and firm. One letter in particular whispered louder than the rest. "Guard what is yours, Evelyn. People will smile at you while planning how to take from you. Guard it well." Her words, written years before, felt prophetic. I traced the ink with my finger and made another silent promise they would not take from me. Not the house, not the money, not my dignity. But what they didn't know was that I was already preparing. I had friends in the right places, lawyers, advisors, people who owed me favors. I had begun to make calls to ask questions to protect the estate with structures stronger than glass. Still, I kept my mouth closed at gatherings. I let them believe I was passive, perhaps naive. Let them laugh and clink glasses, let them think the papers in that folder were a leash around my neck. Because while they enjoyed their rehearsals, I was rehearsing something else. I'll explain in the next part. The signing ceremony was meant to be a polite formality, nothing more than papers passed across a polished table, initials scrawled beside neat paragraphs, and champagne poured afterward. That was how he described it. Quick and easy, he had promised with that too-perfect smile. But when I arrived at the law office that Saturday, I knew at once it would not be quick, and nothing about it was easy. His entire family was already gathered there, parents, sister, even a cousin I barely recognized. The room smelled faintly of cologne and fresh leather. On the conference table sat another folder, thick and heavy, its corners weighed down with brass clips. My fiancé greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, but it felt staged. He guided me toward the chair at the head of the table, the spot where a chief executive might sit during a board meeting. For a moment, I imagined the scene through their eyes, not a woman entering a marriage, but an asset entering a merger. The lawyer, a tall man with silver hair, cleared his throat. "We are here to finalize the agreement," he said. He adjusted his glasses and tapped the folder. "It is customary, of course, for both parties to protect their interests." I opened the folder. My name appeared again and again in bold letters tied to clauses about property, future income, and distribution in case of divorce. The words blurred for a moment, not because I did not understand them, but because I understood too well. Each line tightened a noose. I raised my eyes to meet his. "You promised me this was standard, but this—" I tapped the page. "This demands my inheritance outright. This demands the estate itself." He leaned back, spreading his arms wide, his grin widening as though he were a showman on stage. "Why fight it? Once we're married, it's all one family. Everyone here deserves to feel secure about our future." "Secure for whom?" I asked. His sister snorted. "For us. Obviously." The words landed like stones. Even the lawyer hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. but the worst had not yet come. That afternoon, as I sat at home with the prenup folder unopened beside me, my phone buzzed. A message had arrived in my private inbox, not from him, not from anyone I expected. It was an email forwarded from a source I did not know. Attached was a thread of correspondence. The names at the top made my chest tighten. My fiancé, and a woman I recognized only faintly, a business partner from one of his ventures. The subject line read, Estate Integration Plan. I clicked, heart pounding. Their conversation spilled across the screen, polite at first, then increasingly bold. They spoke of folding Evelyn's property into the company portfolio, of leveraging her inheritance as collateral, of ensuring she remains compliant. There were even notes about renovation budgets and future resale values. And then at the bottom, a sentence that stripped the last of my hesitation. Once she signs the estate is ours to maneuver. She will not resist, she trusts too much. I read it again and again, my hands shaking. The woman had added a playful line. You've always been good at convincing women. I dropped the phone onto the desk, my pulse loud in my ears. It was not paranoia. It was not insecurity. It was betrayal spelled out in pixels. Still, I told no one. Not yet. I folded the printout of the email and slipped it into the same drawer that held my aunt's letters. Guard what is yours, she had written. I would guard it, but not with silence. The next day at brunch with his family, he draped his arm around me and said sweetly, Evelyn knows we're a team. She's going to sign next week, right? I smiled, though my stomach turned. Of course, I said. They cheered, raising their mimosas. The clinking glasses rang like a bell of war. Inside, I knew exactly what I would do. I would not stop the wedding. Not yet. I would not reveal the email, not while the ink on their arrogance was still drying. Because sometimes revenge is most powerful. When you let the stage grow, crowded the audience lean forward, and the actors believe the play belongs to them. Then, at the perfect moment, you pull the curtain. But I'll tell you that part later. They dressed me in ivory silk and said I looked like a promise. The hotel staff floated like ghosts behind candles and white roses. The quartet rehearsed a hymn I had chosen months ago, when I still believed vows could armor a heart. Outside the ballroom doors, I could hear the soft thunder of guests taking their seats. A coordinator pressed a bouquet into my hand. It smelled of peonies and a future I no longer intended to keep. Hook first. The moment the doors opened, I did not walk down the aisle. I walked to the microphone. Before we begin, I said, my voice steady, there's a document you all might be interested in. Heads tilted. Phones lifted. His mother went pale. My fiancé. Yes, I still called him. That for one more minute stepped forward with a puzzled smile that asked me to be reasonable. On the screen behind us, the projector hummed to life. But I did not start with the emails. Not yet. I started with paper. I started with ink. I started with a promise from the dead. My lawyer, a woman with calm eyes and a voice like a metronome, rose from the front row. She carried a slate gray folder and a small fireproof case. She joined me at the microphone and introduced herself to the room as counsel to my late aunt's estate. She clicked the latches on the case. The sound carried cleanly like a gavel. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, the estate you have all heard so much about is not a bauble. It is a trust. An irrevocable trust executed years before this engagement existed. Its sole beneficiary and controlling trustee is Evelyn. No spouse present or future may claim ownership, collateralization, or managerial control. The trust contains spendthrift protections, anti-assignment provisions, and a hard prohibition against using the assets for third-party ventures. In plain language, it cannot be touched. She held up the deed schedule, the trust's abstract, the notarized amendments my aunt had signed during a winter. I remember for its snow and her cough. The room shifted. You can feel a crowd turn the way you can feel weather change. Air tightens, silence grows a spine. Somewhere in the back, a champagne flute tapped against a table and rolled, ringing faintly as it spun. My fiancé tried to laugh. He failed. This is unnecessary theater, he said, reaching for the microphone. He spoke to the guests as if I were a child with a tantrum. Of course, Evelyn will sign the prenup after the ceremony. We're a team. Are we? I asked. He blinked, still smiling, but the smile trembled. My lawyer continued. A notice of protective filing has been recorded with the county to alert against improper liens. Any attempt to pledge deed over or otherwise encumber these assets, would trigger civil action and, given certain representations made to potential investors, potentially criminal review. That last phrase drew blood. A cousin coughed. An uncle checked his phone as if the floor had texted him an exit. I looked out over the sea of faces and thought of every brunch where they asked for proof, every rehearsal where they treated me like a vault with a veil. I let the silence breathe. I let humiliation evaporate into something cleaner. Then I nodded to the audiovisual tech. The screen flashed white, then resolved into an email header. Names at the top. His, hers, the woman he called a partner. Subject line, Estate Integration Plan. Lines of text rolled down sentences that discussed me as a resource, that listed my property as a lever, that mocked my trust in him. When the line appeared, once she signs, the estate is ours to maneuver. She trusts too much, someone in the second row made a sound like a prayer swallowed wrong. He lunged then. Turn that off. This is private. It became public, I said. The moment you toasted my inheritance in front of your friends and their phones. It became cruel when you asked me to parade a deed like a party trick. This is not a merger. It is a marriage. Or it was supposed to be. He tried a different tactic. He softened his voice. Evelyn, let's step outside. Let's talk. I shook my head. We had months to talk. You used those months to plan a capture. Behind us, the emails kept sliding by, budgets penciled over photographs of my aunt's favorite terrace, target dates, a draft term sheet with bullet points about cross-collateralization. I heard a guest whisper, leveraging someone you love, and another answer that is not love. Phones filmed. The string quartet had fallen still. Their instruments rested on knees like folded wings. The coordinator, poor woman, hovered at the edge of the aisle, uncertain whether to cue the music or call security or pray. I lifted the bouquet and placed it gently on the lectern, as if returning something I had borrowed. I am not here to beg, I said. I am here to correct the record. Then I told our story in a few clean strokes, a rehearsal toast where a man joked that $500,000 inheritance was his, a folder shoved like a bill across a table, a family group chat, asking for proof of a deed, a set of emails that did not speak of love, only capture. I kept my voice low. I let the facts carry their own weight. When you speak softly, people lean in. When truth is plain, it does not need music. My lawyer set a final document on the lectern. For clarity, she said, this is a certified summary of the trust's protective clauses. Anyone who repeats the claim that they own the estate will be treated as making a false statement about title. Today's remarks constitute formal notice. His father stood. You orchestrated this to embarrass us. No, I said. You orchestrated this wedding to pressure me. I simply moved the spotlight. For a heartbeat, no one moved. And then movement came all at once. A bridesmaid walked to my side and slipped her arm through mine. His sister sat down hard as if her knees had forgotten their job. An uncle muttered about lawyers. Someone in the back started clapping, a single pair of hands uncertain. The applause did not spread. It did not need to. The record had been corrected, the stage reset. I turned to him. You may still marry for love one day. I hope you do. But not today, not me. I removed the ring quietly without flourish and set it beside the bouquet. He reached for it and stopped as if the metal might burn. I will have the invitations amended, I said from wedding to statement. A bitter line, perhaps. Still, it felt accurate. I looked back to the guests. I know some of you came for romance. I am sorry. What you received is a lesson. Guard what is yours. Guard even harder when people laugh and tell you to relax. Phones filmed my face. I let them. You cannot choose the witness you get. You can only choose the truth you offer. Now the CTA, because this is not just my story, it is a pattern. Tell me where you are watching from. Hit subscribe if you have ever felt your life reduced to someone else's spreadsheet. This part matters. The next one will sting. I stepped away from the microphone. The quartet, uncertain, found a minor chord and let it fade. I walked down the aisle alone. The dress whispered around my ankles like a curtain closing. But what they did not know was that the curtain was not the end. It was an intermission. The real play was about to begin. The wedding hall did not dissolve into silence after my words. It erupted. Guests spoke in hushed tones that weren't hushed at all. Phones held higher than faces, screens glowing like fireflies in the dark. I stepped down from the lectern and left the bouquet, where it lay no longer a symbol of vows, but of warnings ignored. By the time I reached the side exit, a storm had already started to gather online. Hashtags formed faster than raindrops. Within the hour, clips of my fiancé's smug toast from the rehearsal dinner resurfaced his voice, echoing over music and laughter. Half of your $1 million inheritance is mine. Strangers debated my life as if it were a public trial. Some called me brave, others foolish, but all of them watched. Social media has no mercy, but sometimes that merciless gaze works in your favor. His name trended before midnight. The company he ran, an ambitious startup, with glossy ads and fragile books, saw its stock dip as investors panicked. CEO caught scheming against fiancé's inheritance made headlines that no publicist could spin. The family scrambled. His mother rang my phone twice, leaving messages that alternated between pleading and fury. "Do you realize what you've done to us?" she hissed in one. In another, "We can fix this, but you need to take down those emails." She never asked if I was all right. Not once. His sister wrote to me on Instagram, "You've ruined him. He'll never recover. Are you happy now?" Happy, no. But satisfied? Not yet. Because what they didn't know was that I had more. The leaked emails had been a prelude. Tucked away in my safe was another file, a thicker one, composed of spreadsheets and signed statements documents. A friend in finance had helped me collect. They showed how my fiancé had been using false projections to lure investors, dangling my estate as proof of future stability. Fraud by any other name still smells the same. I did not release those documents immediately. No patience is a sharper blade. I let him squirm first. I let the company release a limp press statement about misunderstandings and private family matters. I let him appear on a morning news segment with eyes too bright and voice too brittle, assuring the world that love still guided his actions. And then 2 days later, the file appeared online. Not from me, at least not directly. A journalist I trusted had everything they needed. The story ran with copies of balance sheets, investor complaints, and a simple headline, "Trust Betrayed CEO's Fiancé Reveals Fraud Tied to Wedding Scandal." That was when the bottom fell out. Investors fled. Partners canceled contracts. The business partner, the woman whose name was on those emails, saw her own private messages leak next photographs that should have remained between her and him, but somehow didn't. She issued her own statement, dripping with rehearsed sorrow, but the public had already chosen its villain, and she was not far behind him in their judgment. Inside the family, panic reigned. I heard whispers of fights, his father blaming him for arrogance, his mother blaming me for vengeance, cousins arguing about who should step forward to save face. But no one could stop the avalanche once it began rolling. And me, I sat in my apartment, lights dim the city, murmuring outside. I sipped coffee and watched the numbers plummet on a financial news ticker, not because I delighted in ruin, but because I needed to see proof that betrayal had consequences. Still, I kept one last card close. In the corner of my living room, a small camera sat on its tripod. At the wedding, while emotions spiraled and voices rose, that camera had been quietly recording. It captured the exact moment he tried to snatch the microphone from me, the look in his eyes when the emails flashed on screen, the raw arrogance dissolving into fear. Soon the world would see that too. Because revenge is not only about striking back, it is about narrative. They had tried to turn me into a caricature, a passive bride, an ATM with a pulse. Now I was rewriting the script frame by frame. And yet I promise you, this story was still not finished. There are rooms that pretend to be quiet, and then there are rooms that demand it. This one demanded it. Velvet curtains, a brass lectern, a wall of screens behind a stage where executives usually talked about growth and vision. They had gathered for an emergency town hall, half shareholders and half journalists, the rest a nervous entourage who smelled faintly of cologne and fear. He would speak first, his publicist had promised the press to address rumors. I waited in the audience with a small remote in my palm. It felt like a key to a door only I knew existed. Hook, then truth. When he stepped to the microphone, jaw set, suit immaculate, he began with a sentence so polished it squeaked. "I am here to clarify a deeply private misunderstanding." He looked straight into the cameras, not at me. He spoke of love, of confusion, of documents taken out of context. He said the word integrity, as if it were a talisman. The screens behind him showed the company logo in blue and white, serene as a winter sky. I let him finish the paragraph. Then I stood. A ripple moved through the room like wind across tall grass. He faltered. "Evelyn," he said, soft enough for the microphones to catch, "please sit. We can handle this together." Together. The same word they had used when they meant control. I walked to the aisle, turned so the cameras could see my face, and raised the remote. "A short clip," I said. Context. A technician somewhere flinched, but the screens obeyed my signal. The logo vanished. The ballroom from our rehearsal dinner filled the wall, gold light crystal flutes, a white tablecloth reflecting chandeliers. His face filled the framed cheeks warm with wine. His voice unmistakable rang in this new room, with the same easy arrogance. "Half of your $1 million inheritance is mine. Just sign the prenup and relax." No music now, no laughter to soften it. The sentence fell like a stone into a well, and we all listened to it sink. He rushed the mic. "Stop that." He barked at the booth. "This is stolen." "Recorded in a public venue," I said. "You made it public." On screen, the camera tilted to show the folder leather red, the notary stamp glinting like a brand. A chorus of oohs and laughter from the rehearsal, then a freeze frame on the folder itself. I paused the video. In the stillness, the room discovered its own breath. "Before any of you ask whether this is about a lover's quarrel," I said one fact. I lifted a one-page summary my lawyer had prepared. "The estate you courted belongs to an irrevocable trust. I am the sole trustee. It cannot be pledged, transferred, or folded into any venture." I told him so. He planned otherwise. Phones rose like a field of silverfish. Journalists leaned forward. Someone whispered, "Say the word fraud," as if that word were a gate we might all tumble through. I pressed play. The second clip began not in a ballroom, but on a laptop screen. Emails already seen by half the internet scrolled again, this time stitched to a short exchange captured by my little wedding camera when he tried to yank the mic. "You trust me," he hissed off the main mic, but loud in the room's hush. "You sign. We fix everything after." His hand shot across the frame. The bouquet trembled where I had set it down. That was all. 40 heartbeats of raw context. I stopped the video and returned the room to its live face. The hush had changed. It was no longer waiting. It was weighing. He tried again. "Evelyn, do not do this." His voice wobbled where it used to glide. "Think of our families." I nodded. I did. I lifted my left hand. The ring was gone. And I thought of every woman who has been asked to confuse kindness for consent, silence for agreement, and marriage for merger. A hand went up in the press row. "Are you canceling the wedding?" "Yes," I said. I canceled it in my heart when the folder touched my plate. Today is merely the courtesy notice. Another question fired. "Is there a criminal referral?" I did not smile, though it almost came. "Investigators prefer to receive evidence before they receive television," I said. "They already have mine." I did not say how many spreadsheets, how many sworn statements, how many little threads my friend in finance had traced until a weave appeared. I did not need to. The fear in his eyes told its own arithmetic. His publicist tried to reclaim the stage with a raised palm and a sentence about privacy. It fell apart midair. Shareholders stood. A board member asked in a voice too loud whether the chair was present. The room discovered the unpleasant taste of consequence. But retribution is not the same as cruelty. I kept the blade clean. "I am not here to gloat," I said. "I will not post more than you have seen. The point has been made: when you turn a person into collateral, you are not courting, you are extracting. And when you do it in public, the bill arrives in public." He took one step toward me. A guard took one step toward him. For a moment we were a geometry lesson. Two lines that had once promised to meet now, veering forever apart. I clicked the remote again. One last frame filled the screens: my aunt's terrace at dusk, the iron railing, the cypresses cut into dark candles against a sky that held the color of bruised peaches. A single sentence from her letter scrolled below in elegant type. "Guard what is yours. Guard it kindly, but guard it." The room exhaled. Some guests stood to leave. Others stayed to watch the board convene in a knot of whispers. Contracts would be canceled before evening, statements drafted. Lawyers phoned with voices that did not pretend to be calm. Outside cameras waited to turn our air into headlines. I stepped off the aisle and felt the remote go light in my palm. Revenge done properly is not fireworks. It is architecture. You plan the sightlines, you place the load, bearing pillars, you let gravity do the rest. As the doors opened and cold air slid in from the corridor, I thought of the life that would follow. A smaller apartment for a while, perhaps. A return to my lectures. Weekends at the terrace where the cypresses watched over a trust that never asked to be famous. I would not be an emblem forever. I would be a person again. But what they did not know, what even I could not have known, was how quickly the company would unravel once the people who believed his every word now believed mine. That part with its numbers and signatures and midnight calls, I will tell you next. Tell me where you are watching from. If you have ever walked away from a deal dressed up as love, say so in the comments. We should talk about what dignity costs and why the price is worth paying. When the dust had barely settled from the company scandal, my parents insisted on a family dinner. They called it a chance to clear the air, but I knew better. I showed up anyway, dressed plainly with nothing but a small folder in my bag. The restaurant was elegant, the kind with polished wood and soft piano music, but the tension at our table clashed with the setting. He sat across from me, pale from weeks of headlines. His mother kept dabbing her eyes with a linen napkin, while his sister scrolled her phone, no doubt, tracking the next article about their downfall. It began politely, too politely. My father raised a glass and tried to toast to family resilience, but before the clink of crystal had faded, his voice cut through. You've humiliated us enough. If you truly loved this family, you'd sign over part of the estate to rebuild what we lost. His words were sharp, rehearsed, and cruel. I pulled the folder from my bag. The table quieted. Inside were copies of texts, bank slips, and even a photograph of him hand in hand with the partner he had sworn was just a colleague. The photo had already circulated online, but seeing it printed laid flat on the table beside the menu made it undeniable. Gasps rippled. His mother whispered, "Is this necessary?" His sister muttered, "It's fake." But he said nothing. His silence was the loudest confession. Then came the final blow, not from me, but from the waiter. He placed the bill down with a heavy thud. $2,800, he announced. My sister, seated 2 chairs away, smirked and pushed the bill toward me. You're the successful one. Pay for it. I looked around the table at faces that had only ever seen me as their safety net, their wallet, their scapegoat. Calmly, I slid the bill back across the linen cloth. No, I said steady and clear. Let the successful people cover it. For a moment, the air froze. No one laughed. No one spoke. The waiter stood waiting, awkward, but patient. Finally, his mother's hand trembled as she reached for her card. His father muttered something about dignity. And my ex-fiancé stared down at the papers I had left on the table, his jaw tight, his empire already ashes. But what they didn't know was that this dinner was not the end. It was the prelude. The video footage I had saved from the wedding was still in my hands, unseen by the world. That was my final act, waiting for the right stage. I have learned that revenge does not always end with applause. Sometimes it ends in silence, an empty room, the echo of doors closing, the soft click of a lock as you walk away. Weeks passed after that dinner. Their empire crumbled faster than even I imagined. Investors vanished, lawsuits gathered like storm clouds, and their glossy reputation peeled away in headlines and hashtags. His sister deleted her social accounts. His mother stopped showing her face in the social clubs she once ruled. He himself vanished from the press after one disastrous interview where his hands shook so badly he could not hold his notes. And me, I returned to my lectures. The classroom smelled of chalk and ink the way it always had, and my students did not care about scandals. They cared about deadlines, about grades, about life. Their indifference was a balm. It reminded me that beyond betrayal and spectacle, the world goes on. But I was not finished. Not quite. The small camera I had placed at the rehearsal dinner still sat in my study. On it, the uncut footage of the moment, he toasted my inheritance, his words cruel and careless laughter ringing around me like chains. I debated for weeks, release it or bury it. Was it vengeance or was it justice? In the end, I chose neither. I chose memory. I invited only a few close friends to my apartment one evening. We poured wine, sat in a circle, and I played the video on my television. They watched in silence, the toast, the laughter, the folder sliding across the table. When it ended, I turned the screen black. That, I said, is why I walked away. They nodded. No applause, no cheers, only understanding. That was enough. The next morning, I locked the footage in the safe beside my aunt's letters. Her words still echoed, "Guard what is yours." I realized she did not mean only property. She meant dignity, choice, peace. In time, I bought a smaller apartment filled with bookshelves and quiet. I kept the estate not as a weapon, but as a sanctuary. Some weekends, I drive out to the terrace, sit beneath the cypresses, and watch the sky darken into bruised peach and indigo. I think of her, of promises, of the strange currency of humiliation, and how it can be turned into strength. If you ask me whether I regret anything, I would say no. The pain was real, yes, but so was the clarity it brought. Betrayal stripped away illusion and revenge. Careful, patient revenge gave me the space to breathe again. Now I leave you with this: if you think Evelyn made the right choice, comment right. If you have a better way to handle betrayal, share your idea below. Because families, money, and dignity, they always intersect. And when they do, the choices you make will define not just what you own, but who you are.